Welcome to the Success Flow Podcast, where our mission is simple: to be better each day and relay our findings with other relentless humans defining success for themselves. If that sounds like you, let's begin.
Dude, Phil, this is a milestone episode. I don't know if you realize, but we're like almost 30 episodes in, and we have our first female guest, which is incredible because we've always, not only is it like cool that it's a girl, but it's also, we've asked other females and they just haven't jumped on for whatever reason. Maybe it's something that you and I say or don't like us or whatever. But this one, she loves us and she has to because she's my younger sister who I've known for, no, wait, hang on, let me hold that. I haven't known her my entire life. She's known me her entire life. I'm 2 years older, but we've lived together in college. I've obviously grown up with her. I love this woman. She's doing some amazing things as an entrepreneur, but I wanted to introduce Shannon Harris. Shannon, thank you for jumping on. I have to know, why did you say yes to joining or jumping on the podcast with Phil and I and talking shop with us crazy people?
Well, I mean, it makes perfect sense for where I'm at personally, professionally, and I really love all of the topics you guys are talking about and that you explore. I think your openness and willingness to explore just some kind of certain esoteric and philosophical conversations is really aligned with me, and I love that. So, of course, I can come on and join in that conversation. And I'm also starting professionally to do a little podcast tour of my own. So just wanting to be a guest on different podcasts for some of the things I'm up to. And so the timing was just really good for that as well.
It is perfect timing. And it is about time that we have some female representation on here. And some of the guys in our circle aren't willing to jump on either. So we're so pumped to have you on today. We've been looking forward to it for a while. And we have to, very quickly go back in history because technically, Shannon, I met you before Steven in one of the most awkward arrangements that's ever happened. I just moved to Arizona and our lovely parents, your mother and my godmother, thought it was a great idea to set us up on this double date at P.F. Chang's for lunch one day. And I think I'm scarred by it. I remember exactly what I was wearing. Kim didn't really tell me what was absolutely going down, but we showed up to P.F. Chang's and they were so basically like, oh, you two should be friends. And I just remember wanting to get out of there as quick as possible.
They were smiling, having a great time. And we were like,
oh my God,
what is happening? Oh. And then I remember shortly after, she's like, "Oh, we're going to be stopping by Stephen and Shannon's house because you were roommates at the time, living in Tempe." And I'm like, "Kim, I think that ship has sailed. I don't. We've been there, done that." And then, sure enough, 3 years later, Stephen and I wind up meeting and becoming friends.
Dude, Kevin Gary did come to that house party. We used to throw a ton of house parties at our condo. We used to call them, what do we call them, Shannon? The condo days. Like some of the best chapter ever. It was so fun living with you for 3 years. We were both single and we'd throw parties all the time. And yeah, your aunt and uncle, Kevin Gary, came over with our parents. And they were like, "Oh, we were going to bring my nephew Phil." And I was like, "You should have brought him," And that was like 2 years before you and I had even met. It was so funny. And you guys had this awkward double date.
And we've come full circle. Here we are today.
What was your experience, Shannon, going on that double date, like an arranged date that you had no idea going into it? What was your experience running into Mr. Crawford?
Like he said, like you're just like, what is happening here? Who is this? Why is this happening? I'm a little unsure. We're two pretty cool college people. I think we can meet our own people, like.
Oh,
anyway,
scarring moment. But the intentions were all great. Thank you, yes. Karen and Kim. So Shannon, between now and that wonderful double date, tell us a little bit about your journey through entrepreneurship, how that path has kind of evolved, and kind of what you're getting at today, just in kind of a nutshell to set the tone.
Yeah, I think my journey is really interesting because I sort of did things. I mean, I think generally in life I do things the opposite way that they're, supposed to. But I started really big, and then I've just kind of gotten smaller and smaller in my endeavors and what I do. And not to say that I'm not, have more big things in the future, but when I started Fused Living, we just kind of out the gate did new construction developments. And so I went to school for interior design, worked at a design firm for a couple years, but really I was 25 when we started Fused Living, and it was just like, we just went for it. And so doing new construction development, we kind of built and stacked up our project size, but we got to a pretty decent sized project for, a boutique developer. And yeah, that's not a small feat. That's not, something that people normally just jump into. And so there was definitely a lot of learning, and definitely, just had to be kind of head in the game around that stuff. And then where I say I got smaller is because then I started my interior design branch, which is obviously a little bit of a smaller operation. And at this very moment, I'm just, I had a team, grew a team there, and right now I'm just myself. And so I've just kind of like done really big things. And then through different life experiences and business experiences, I've just kind of, brought myself down to being able to really show up as my full me and my authentic self, and really tap into everything that I'm truly passionate about and reconnect with all of that right now, and then start to grow again. So
yeah, that's a really cool story, and not like you just defining your purpose along the way and like what really makes sense, right? Like you just jumped in, challenged yourself on purpose, figured out what makes sense. And now you're the happiest you could be, and doing some incredible stuff. And I saw you went to the Art Institute of Phoenix for college, interior design degree, right? And you were doing some incredible stuff there, and you're like, I'm moving to Colorado. You moved right when my wife and I, Kim, when we got together, I moved out at like 22. And then you're like, well, I moved to Colorado and I'm developing these multi-family unit. I mean, you were doing like $1 million condos out there in Cherry Creek as one of your final projects. You were there for 10 years. And these were like incredible builds. Like the interiors of these things they weren't your typical home or typical condo. Like you put atriums like in the middle of the house, and you brought nature and the outside in, which I thought was really cool. You always had that mindfulness of how do people feel when they're living in their home. And I think that's where the crux of Fused Living came from, is trying to fuse it all together. And I remember you coming up with that name, right? And it had something to do with how do I make people comfortable in their house where they can focus, they can be mindful, and they can be the best version of themselves. And I think that's really cool, because we talk about that on this podcast a lot, but you're building it in someone's home. So what is your ideologies there, and how did you come up with that? Is that how you've always been, or is that something you learned, or where did that come from?
Well, I mean, and Phil might not know this, but I started as thinking since I was a young girl, I thought I was just going to be a doctor. I always was interested in health and wellness and things like that, and the topic. And so, I think when you're little, you're like, oh, I'm going to go and be a doctor, because that's what you do when you care about health. And I did a really quick internship out of college, and then I was like, nope, that's not, like, I need something more creative.
By the way, I got to stop you there. I remember you got to be a phlebotomist. Oh my gosh, Phil. So we're in the condo, right? And she's like, Steven, I got to practice on you, right? And a phlebotomist drawing blood. I'm like her first victim. I'm calling myself a victim because that's what it felt like. I'm standing there with my arm, and her hand is shaking so bad. And I'm like, Shannon, I don't know if this is the career for you. Like, I'm really nervous right now if you should be doing this. So you pivoted well, because I don't know if that was the right move. And you did pivot into what you're doing now. So I'm glad that worked out.
That's why I never went to the parties.
Yeah. We were using needles to practice for careers, Phil. We weren't using needles the other way.
That's good.
I mean, to really bring it full circle, that's kind of part of my story. Anyway, so interested in health and wellness, and in school we had our first sustainability course, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting, healthy for the planet, yada, yada. And I really got more interested in the human side of sustainability and like organic materials. And there's so many different impacts that the materials we use in our homes have on our body systems. And I think there is so much that can be done about that, which is why I've started, all the pillars that Fused Living stands on and what the shop stands on and the products that we put out there for people to purchase is all non-toxic, the least amount of chemicals as possible. Nothing's perfect, but there are a lot of really great manufacturers that are really trying to change that narrative as well. And so it's natural settings, it's biophilia, it's organic, it's very human health based, the entire premise of what Fuse Living stands on, as well as the mental health aspect, like psychology and now neuroscience is what I've been studying this past year.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, like as people are approaching their internal environments, or maybe they haven't looked at how it's impacting them mentally quite yet. And I think a lot of people approach their interior design of, oh, how is this going to be an expression of me and my family? Or maybe I saw this at Pottery Barn and it made me feel good. I'm going to start there. How do you see kind of when folks are first coming to you for how they want to start creating a space that inspires them or puts them in a good state? What are you kind of seeing as a starting point that people come to the table with what they're trying to do out the gate? And what does that reflect on them kind of from a mental state and what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think I don't know that people really start from a place of looking at their mental state. I think people are like, oh, I want to improve my house, or I want my house to be more updated or feel better or whatever. But for the majority of people, like they don't really know what that means. And so I have a pretty heavy discovery period, and I start to ask questions right away. Like, how do you want to feel? What are you adverse to? What's your history? Like, what are the homes that you grew up in? Like, like I really get into some nitty gritty conversations with people. And, what are the moods you're after? What is your lifestyle like outside of the house? What does your house need to provide for you? And how can it support you? It's not just a dwelling, but like, how can your home and your home environment actually support all of your goals, your lifestyle, your family dynamic? Like, what are the personalities? Are there personality traits that need to be addressed that can 100% be addressed through design elements? And so yeah, I could go really far into it. I don't know how far you want me to go.
We're going to keep peeling the onion.
Okay, go ahead. Good.
Yeah, I think that, so one of the things that we talk about a lot is work-life integration, being your authentic self and who you are in your personal life as well as your work life. And I think what's really cool in what you're doing is you're building home life integration, right? So like people are they're going on hikes or they're experiencing nature or they're going out and doing different things out into the world. And then when they come home, it's just a place to sleep sometimes, right? They wake up, go to work, come home, do brainless activity, wake up, go to work, come home, do brainless activity, right? And so they have this kind of vicious cycle, if you will. And what we're striving to do is help people with a mindset shift of well-being and being a business athlete that people want to be, whether entrepreneur or intrapreneur. And so when you bring that home life integration, that's a totally different aspect that we've never touched on. And that's why it's really exciting and really important to have you on this episode, is because not a lot of people think about this, like you said. They're thinking about what are the ranch sink or, style kitchen that I can have, or, what's the stainless steel appliances I can have. Trendy. Yeah. They're looking at a magazine or seeing something on Instagram. And you're really bringing a mindset shift in how people think about their home, which I think is pretty incredible. And you're doing it through courses now.
Yeah. So like I said, this past year, I've gotten more into neuroscience, and I've always been interested in psychology behind design. And that's something I layered into our new construction developments. And I just kind of implemented that kind of on the back end of client projects, and, would like tell people a little bit about, why this might make more sense versus this from a psychological aspect. But I think I just got to this point where I'm like, I don't know why I'm, sort of tiptoeing around all this. Like, this is incredibly impactful, and I'm ready to speak this message and make it an impact for people and have people participate in the decision making around these different aspects of sensory design. Is really kind of the baseline of how we tap into different states of being through design and through neuroscience. And I love that you talked about like business integration. What'd you say? A business athlete, entrepreneur athlete?
Yeah, a business athlete, but how you have work-life balance. It's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly like I had the dream for the last 3 years to work with a life coach or work with someone of the sort. And it just so happened that I ended up partnering with a neuroscientist, which was just like so much better, like so great that it happened in that way. But to really develop tips and tricks and just tools for people who are, have that sort of high cognitive load, right? I mean, as business entrepreneurs, like there's a lot of cognitive fatigue. There's a lot of cognitive load that happens every day. And so how can we really support that through elements in our home environment? And what are your goals? If you're working on that kind of work-life integration, you're going to have personal goals, you're going to have business goals. And so again, how can home support you? If you want to wake up early to go on your runs and you're stepping on cold tile and you're like, this sucks, right? Like, how is that like first step down in the morning to be a better experience? I know, right? Like, just a soft, fuzzy rug. Like, it could be that simple, It's like everything from tiny little elements like that to like your macro environment, what shapes, what spatial arrangements are around you to really lift you up into the state of being that you need to be in.
This gets me so excited when you mentioned working with a neuroscientist about, and merging the worlds where your expertise comes in, got me so pumped, because in the Flow Research Collective, which is a group of neuroscientists coming together, figuring out how we can incorporate flow into our entire lives, our work life, personal life, everything that we're talking about here. One of the premises is setting up your environment for flow to where you walk into a space, your brain automatically goes to, this area is for my massive transformative purpose. This is where I do the work for what I'm looking for. And for myself and Paula also, I think a lot of people start with just taking it back to the basics before, like from a clear slate. Less is more, right? How can you have only things that inspire you and really embody what you're trying to do in that workspace? And kind of the Marie Kondo, who's had a huge moment, the act of tidying up is kind of level one, right? Like removal of the things that are distracting. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, kind of, if that's often phase one. That's where it kind of started my space, not necessarily going completely minimalist, but less is more, and really curating that space.
Yeah. Two things to talk about there. So the first thing is there's sort of a genetic, like what's in all of us, a genetic baseline of how we perceive shape, pattern. Like there's some things that are just biologically, evolutionarily ingrained in all of us. For example, we perceive round shapes as much less threatening than jagged shapes. And that's actually because our eyes have more receptors to really recognize the pattern or the shape of round shapes versus jagged shapes. And that makes us feel calmer. That lights up certain neural pathways that are more calmulating to those areas of the brain versus jagged shapes. We don't have as many eye receptors. And so that just lights up different pathways in the brain that start to kick off the fight or flight response. And so there's so many things that are just like wired in us to be that way. But then there's also this layer of what are our personal experiences. And so whereas there might be a baseline in how we perceive different shapes, we're going to have different experiences with different colors, different, patterns and things like that kind of build on those shapes. And so I always start with, talking about like, what are the baseline? How do we reduce threats? And so when you're talking about decluttering and minimal kind of environments, that to me would be this removal of threats. So you're removing potential, rough edges or jagged edges or just like clutter and more stimulation. And then at that point, you can then introduce the more positive sensory elements. And so minimal is great, but you also don't want it to be too boring because there's this sweet spot of intrigue, right? And so you need to be intrigued to get to that flow state. And so if you don't have enough stimulation, you're going to be bored, you're going to be flat. But if you have too much stimulation, you're going to be, on overdrive. And so you have to find out what that sweet spot is for you. And that's where it becomes highly personal.
So what do you say to the skeptic who says, I'm just going to go buy a couch because I want a new blue couch? And I know you're very into, there's different materials that make, healthier living, right? And so how do you tell someone like, well, don't just go buy that couch from IKEA. I don't know if IKEA has good, healthy couches or not. I don't know. It's just a place I thought of. But what do you say to that person? Like, why is it important to think about what that couch can do for your home?
People have to be open to the conversation for sure, right? So if it is a skeptic, I just kind of layer in the higher level questions.
They got to almost be on, do you think they almost have to be on the journey already of like more well-being, right? Is it challenging to?
Yeah, it is. It for sure is. And that's where like with the Homeself courses, I'm absolutely targeting people who are on that journey. I'm targeting life coaches, so, and then they can layer this into all of their clients and their client work. I'm targeting realtors who are on that kind of personal growth journey. So yeah, I think for me, my starting point and path of least resistance is that, and building testimonials, building case studies, building like a database of things, proof, if you will, that this has impact and people talking about it. That's my starting point. But yeah, I think there's obviously skeptics, and I think it's just diving in and asking prompting those questions, right? Like, well, what is your lifestyle like? Do you have a kid in the house that is hyperactive because they might not need a bright color, or they might not need 17 pillows on the couch? That's more stimulation to enhance their hyperactivity. So yes, let's strip some of that away, right? And so like really looking at the personalities, the character traits and states of being of the people in your household is the question to prompt to make the correct decisions.
And that's extremely smart. I mean, you're very successful. And so finding the right people to partner with, like your realtors, life coaches, or whatever, that already are helping people on that journey, it's almost like sometimes you're not selling to, or not selling, but just you're not talking to the consumer. You're talking to the partner that's talking to the consumer, to their clients. And that's brilliant. I mean, that your Homeself, your Homeself courses are, I mean, people are a pain in the ass. So B2B is so much easier, right? But like it's finding the right partners that can understand the message. And the skeptics, they're just closed off, right? And that's what we're striving to bring, that mindset shift of having an open mind to new ideas and find out what's possible and having them ask those questions. I think it's brilliant what you're doing. Homeself courses are awesome. And I think it's really cool how you're building those out.
I've leaned into it a lot myself too. Like the work that I'm talking about, I have a lot of personal experience with, and life's been a little funny for the last year for me. And I've really leaned into all of the concepts that I'm talking about, and understanding self and finding little nuggets that really speak to you personally to bring into your space is super powerful. And to really, take that deep dive and do the work to understand that it can have a really incredible outcome.
On that topic specifically, I know you've mentioned human design being worked throughout this, and I do have some exposure to that with one of my performance coaches having us go through it. I was extremely skeptical at first, and I've done it a couple times. I think I'm a manifesting generator, or I think that's the category that I wound up with. The one thing about it is the date or the time of birth. I have no idea what that was. And I think that it shouldn't throw it off a whole lot. It's been kind of, if you know it, you know it. If not, whatever. But some very interesting things that came back from that profile that were spot on after doing the test. So I was hoping you could kind of expand on the human design piece a lot and kind of the connection there with how we're approaching our environment.
I actually just started diving into human design, and probably honestly only about a month ago. And so I've really only been diving into my own and just making, different decisions, or kind of looking at how I'm approaching situations or decisions for myself first. I haven't really developed anything yet for like a more kind of client based or like an action plan or like tips or anything yet, because it's something that I'm super enthralled in it though. And like it's like another thing that is so spot on, like you said. It's another kind of power tool that I'm really getting into.
We'll have to get Steven to do his and do it.
Yeah, you both are very present moment type of people, and I struggle with it, and I'm continuing to get better. It's that 1% shift for me to retrain the chaotic mind that I have. I like to call it chaotic organization, but retrain it to have that present moment. And I was having coffee with Shannon. I was telling you the story just last night, and we got cut off. I didn't get to finish the story, but talking about how thinking every moment you're pregnant with this moment. It's the way this guy described it to me. It's sounds kind of strange, but he says you're birthing every moment, and what you're doing right now in this present moment is taking care of that baby for the next moment, and literally just focusing on birthing the next moment in a positive light. And it was really interesting the way he put that on, and just, what am I doing now for these moments to have successful next moments, and just continuing to operate in that way you'll compound success and happiness down the road. And it's interesting that he put it that way. And Phil, you said the word birth and you said the word moment, and it just made me think of that, Shannon. But I don't know, what do you've always kind of been, I think there was 10 years ago, you said, I don't look at clocks anymore. I just, obviously you have a schedule and you know what's going on, but I thought that was the craziest thing. Like, you didn't work off a schedule. You just it was like moment to moment, and you're very successful. And so it's just a different mindset shift from me. I'm very structured. And so I'm interested to hear how for the listeners, how you tick and how you operate in that way.
Well, I think through the last few years of self-work, I've realized I'm a highly variable person. And so, where that could absolutely be a negative and be seen as a negative, I've learned to embrace that as a positive and figure out how to make that work for me and my family and business and that whole dynamic, and I think a lot of that is just setting expectations. And I mean, I'm actually, it's funny you bring up the clock, because I'm very OCD about being on time. Like, I hate being late. And I think that's maybe something we grew up with, but at the same time, I'm just like, the constructs of time, like, what is this? It's my enemy. You know what I mean? Like, this is, moment, why not just have our moment? Who's to say that time stops a moment? That's so silly. So I don't know. It's time is a hard thing to grasp for me.
I love it, because if you start talking about the esoteric, which sometimes we go down on this path, it really is a construct, right? We're operating in this world that it requires it, right? We have to be on time. We have to be intentional how we're going about it. But that's the beautiful thing about flow state, is time completely dilates in both directions. A minute can pass by like an hour, or an hour can pass by like a minute. And that when you start getting into these states, that's what's so exciting. You're like, I got more done in an hour and a half than I did in the past week. And if we can leverage in and lean in to create the space on our calendars and that construct of time to dive into those, that's when the magic can happen. But it also doesn't mean we can just kind of check out and do our own thing all the time, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted you to expand on, go ahead, go.
No, go.
Just how that relates to energy, because everything that you've said to me, I approach it as, you're really trying to impact energy, which is the output that we're using to go about this work. And this space is really what you're trying to curate, is a space to get as much energy output as you can, and the right type of energy for the right moment. So I would love to hear your kind of thoughts on that as we shift from quantum physics, time to energy, and as it relates to the space you're trying to curate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super all about energy and manifesting and frequencies. I had a few months of just really understanding frequencies and how we, internalize different frequencies and the frequencies we operate in and things like that. But what did you end with? You ended with something that I wanted to touch on, and then I started talking about something else. But anyway, I think just embodying the different energies. I think it's all energy, right? And so you said at different energies for different points in time. And I think that's exactly what the Homeself and the neuroscience, the interplay of the neuroscience and the design work is doing. Exactly that, is enhancing or changing your state of being, your internal state of being, for whatever you need in that moment. And so if we have different areas of our homes or different things we can bring out or take away at certain moments to help bridge that gap from being here and wanting to go here, and because we perceive everything in our environment through our senses, it's really all those sensory elements of design that light up different neural pathways to get us from here to there.
I think you have an interesting, we've talked about this manifestation. You have an interesting take on it. Walk us through that a little bit, because you were saying it's finding the proof in the work that you've done in the past, and not spending so much time in the past, but finding the evidence And that's how you manifest your future.
Yeah, there's a few people in the manifestation world that say a similar thing where it's like, it's talking about energy, right? You're borrowing energy from different points in time because manifesting has everything to do with your subconscious, and your subconscious has no construct of time. Your subconscious doesn't understand time at all. And so you're borrowing energy by either stacking up evidence that whatever you're manifesting is happening now. And so it's like little bits of evidence, right? I'm like, all right, my November was a little weird. I want my cash flow to be a little bit better. I'm going to stack up evidence. Like I sold a pillow for $30. Great. I did this for, a small job for $1,300, whatever it is. Like you're stacking up, even though that's small amounts, right? You're still stacking up like to your subconscious. You're saying, oh yeah, I have cash flow coming in. Cash flow is coming in. Here's my evidence. Cash flow is coming in. And then what happens at 11/21, November 21st, I got a job that's like that higher dollar. Great, because I stacked up the evidence all month long that cash flow is coming in. So you're really training your subconscious to look for that evidence. And then you're also borrowing energy from either something you've done in the past, because if you've been in that energy of achieving something in the past, you can 100% achieve it again. You just need to tap in. Or you're looking to the future and saying, okay, here's this future version of me, and I'm just going to borrow a little bit of that future version energy and embody it right now. And I'm going to live with that right now. And then when that future thing comes, you're like, boom, I'm already in that energy. Like, yes, it's mine. It's mine now. It has been mine.
God, I love it. I'm so pumped right now because it's these little tweaks, right? And people get it. We talked about it on this before. This isn't just sitting down and thinking about something, think it's going to pop in your lap. There's an action involved, like attraction. There's an action piece of it, but your brain doesn't know the difference. When you can create and get clear, not only on the visuals of it, but all of your senses, which is right up your alley, that the sensory feeling of being in that scenario where you are achieving and having the impact that you want, your brain truly doesn't know the difference, whether that's real or not. And it's going to impact the actions you take and how you show up. And so I don't think it's esoteric when you start saying it the way you just beautifully delivered it. It's just neuroscience at that point. And I love it. Love it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm such a geek for science and the facts. Like, I'm totally the why person, but why? But why do I feel this way when the wind blows? But why do I feel this way when I look at like a round shape? But why? Like, I have to understand. And I think that's what's led me down to finally this neuroscience journey. And I'm like, been such a geek over the last 6, 7, 8 months because I'm just all in on the geekiness of it.
Dude, Phil sent me a DM on Instagram, and it literally is, who is this, Jake Gyllenhaal? Here's the picture of Jake Gyllenhaal, and it says, when you realize you're geeking a little too hard and gotta lock in. He literally just sent me that like an hour and a half ago, before we jumped on this podcast. And now we're talking about geeking out. I mean, it's so true, right? Like, you just have to go for it.
Some serious synchronicities involved this morning.
I know. Maybe you guys are wanting to wrap up pretty soon, but what do you guys, like, how do you view, we're talking about geeking and like needing to lock it in, but like, that kind of brings me to this view of thought leadership, right? And I think you guys are here on this podcast to be thought leaders on your topics and your open-mindedness and, your success flow and flow state. Like, what is, not to put you on the spot, but like, what do you think about being thought leaders? I see you guys as thought leaders right now. Like, how does that land with you?
Well, I think that exactly what we're doing right now is the starting point, right? When you start realizing you have these ideas and you do start geeking out on it, it only does you so much good to read however many books and write in a journal. And being a thought leader is really just trying to figure out, can you articulate the things that you're learning and pay it forward? Whether that's one person or 1,000 people that you can impact, that's a starting point. So I think that everyone out there is consumed by their passions and their interests in figuring out why they're doing whatever they are in life, and just finding a medium where you can pass it through and be a filter or a prism for that information and let it come through your voice is the starting point. And that's what this year's been for me. And this has been to talk about it with other like-minded people that are finding the same things is really the starting place. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
love that.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, coming from whether if you're a business owner sharing with your team or a thought leader out there within your network, I think you can't help anybody if they don't know who you are. And if you're striving for success and happiness for yourself, that's where it starts, right? It starts with being happy within, focusing on yourself. It's not a selfish thing. It's putting in the work to be the best version of yourself. So that way you can make a positive impact on others. And you can do it quietly. But if you're truly defining the definition of thought leadership, you could be a thought leader with your family. You can be a thought leader with your team as a business owner, or you could be a thought leader to the world, and just defining which, as Phil mentioned, medium or audience you want to attract. I think we're all having the ability to be a thought leader, but it's difficult if you're not putting in the work to be the best version of yourself. And so going back to, I think Jason Payne said it on the episode we had with him where he said, caught, not taught. I thought that was one of the coolest things, is like putting in the work and doing the work yourself to allow others to catch you in the act of doing these things allow you to become a thought leader without having to speak. Right. And I think that's the biggest fear people have, is public speaking and sharing this information and being a filter and facilitating it out, whatever that medium looks like. But it's challenging sometimes for people to get out there and put themselves out there. So just do the work and focus on what you need to do and be caught. You don't have to be out there and teach people, but people will see you working on it. And then you become a thought leader in that way. So I think there's various ways you can be a thought leader. Personally, for me, I'm through speaking and through the podcast and through the email storybook and sharing this mindset shift that I've personally gone through on how to open my mind up, how to define my purpose, what are the things I'm doing to prepare for new opportunities, and creating more pivotal moments for myself that I can look back on and say, yeah, because of that, that's what got me there. And so I'm sharing that, and in turn, I guess by definition, becoming a thought leader. And so I think that's really cool that you asked that question. What about you, Shan? I mean, you're a thought leader in your space, and you're a thought leader in our life and our family, but what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like that it was sort of permission that you just gave to be a thought leader in different areas. You know, I think I've been I've been a shy thought leader, I think, in business. You know, I've just kind of, maybe I've been getting caught. I don't know. Maybe that's the story. And recently I've been like, again, probably just not wanting to tiptoe around all of these messages because I see the power in it. And so it's definitely been on my mind, like, well, how do I be a thought leader? Like, how do I show up as that? How do I, like, what does that really mean? And so I've just been like exploring that and almost kind of putting that label on myself lately of that, right, wrong, or indifferent. But yeah, I really like that you just gave the permission that you have to be like in business. It can be anywhere, you know, it can be in family. It can be anywhere.
It doesn't have to be all over social media. It doesn't have to be on a big stage. It doesn't have to be, you know, you're a thought leader with your clients, you know, in that medium. Maybe you're just focused on that subset of people, or you're a thought leader again with your team, and again, you know, within your family.
Yeah, you're such a great example of being an N of one and using yourself as a case study, right? And I think that's where the beauty happens, is you're living it. You've gone through multiple reinventions, and they're not full reinventions. It's just like V1, V2, V3, and you're building off of the work that you've had to do for your own self. And that's where the authenticity comes in creation. And you're just living proof of that as you go into this next phase, building off of all the fundamental knowledge that you have, but almost taking it a step deeper in the embodiment of everything. Like, what is the fundamental building an ecosystem of who I am, and how can I help people that were in a similar space?
Yeah, exactly. You guys have beautiful words.
I don't know about that. I know it's just been a lot of knowledge. We're knowledge seekers, right? And we learn and we articulate, and we're sharing that information. And I think you're doing a very good job of that as well. We do always close out the pod with a question for our guest. And if you're an avid listener, you probably know it's coming. But what does success mean to Shannon Harris?
Good question. I think success is being adaptable, being open. You know, that happiness obviously comes into play there. But I really think that, you know, you can only be successful if you're constantly adapting and growing, and you have to be in your moments and happy with it and present. I think there's a presence element to being successful. I got to think about this a little more again. I haven't thought about success in a while. And I think that's the V3. What's the V3 identification of success for me? Yeah, but I'm just, you know, what's coming up for me right now is just this adaptability and being present, and, you know, the happiness in those resilient moments.
And To close out, we've talked about the course a little bit. As of right now, what is the best place to find you? Look at what you're kind of working on and direction to the course. We'll link that all in the show notes, but just to keep a pulse on what Shannon's doing at the moment.
Yeah, everything that I do can be found on fuseliving.com. So that's my interior design business, our development projects, and the neuroscience courses. I do have an Instagram that is Homeself_Neurodesign. So that's specifically created very recently for all of the neuroscience stuff. And then, of course, I have the Fuse Living Instagram as well.
That's awesome. Definitely, whoever's listening to this, go find Shannon. She's doing some amazing, amazing work. If you're a life coach, a realtor, or in the space, working with other homeowners, this is definitely the person you want to connect with. Shannon, thanks so much for jumping on. It was a great conversation, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I know you gave Phil goosebumps at least 17 times talking neurodesign and geeking out all over the place, which you did me as well. So I think that's a wrap. That's the pod. Appreciate you jumping on. Subscribe, like, and follow us. Let us know what you want to hear. We'll be back next week, and enjoy your time and focus on the present moments, y'all. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you so much.